Hey, SwingBadder, subscribe, like, and get a shirt. Because if the large fits, a medium fits better. You got to get in on this. Make yourself look shredded, ripped. You know how? You subscribe, you like, you get the shirt. I don't know what else you need.
All right, here we are. I am your host. Welcome to SwingBadder. I am Brendan, your host, a host of the most. I'm something. I don't know what I am. I'm joined today for story time by your two favorites. Todd, how you doing? How you been? How is life?
Oh, man, I got to tell you, life is delightful. I finally decided to get a haircut after about 4 months, so a little less weight on the head. Having a delicious cup of coffee. Dad likes to get sponsored by Spicy Foods. I'm going to tell you, you add a little super coffee creamer, right as rain in the regular department. You don't have to worry. Everything flows, everything goes, nobody knows.
And Dad, how you doing? Welcome to the podcast.
Doing fantastic. It's just a couple weeks till spring training, so I'm going outside, tossing the ball around with the little kid next door, just getting the arm loose, getting ready for spring training.
Well, I'm sure if Noah and Ryan said that, the kid next door would be hurt. Yes. Even, I don't think no one's allowed to be in a retirement community. I bet you he still throws 80.
Daddy, the old man next door broke my hand.
Yeah, if you're not good, you got to go catch him.
Well, we're happy you joined us. We have that the best and the brightest of stories here at Storytime. As you well know, as you've been following, these are wonderful stories from my father. They are near and dear to our hearts, and we just enjoy listening to them like the rest of you. So pull that speaker up, turn up the volume, and sit back and enjoy. Dad, if you are ready, I'd love to hear what you have for us.
Yeah, we got an interesting little quip today. We want to start off with a quote, though, from all of our favorite movie. The one constant through all the years, Ray, has been baseball. But baseball has marked a time, this field, this game. It's a part of our past, Ray. It reminds us of all that was once good, and it can be again. That's from the movie Field of Dreams. And Terrence Mann, the author, played by James Earl Jones, is giving that quote to Ray. So it's about baseball, and that's what we're going to talk about today, baseball and its effect on the whole country. But before we do, I'm going to get started with my snack. Today's snack is going to go healthy. Mini carrots. This thing's good for your health, good for your eyes. Certainly before spring training, we should be eating more vegetables, and that's the commercial for the day.
Dad, did Mom switch out the Cheetos with carrots?
I ate all the Cheetos.
I thought it was Pablo Sandoval and the Boston Red Sox came over and said, you can't eat these anymore.
I'm going to the store today, so they might reappear soon.
Nice.
Much needed.
We're going to start out the story today by talking about, and I've mentioned this before, the evils of segregation on the whole country, but as seen through baseball. For 65 years, very talented athletes, excellent baseball players, never got to play in the major leagues for one reason, the color of their skin. They had to play in an inferior league where there was no good transportation, where they stayed night to night was up in the air, bad situations. A lot of the teams didn't even get home ballparks till in the 30s. They were like traveling shows. And the thing is, the ball players didn't make bad money for the time. They made enough money that it wasn't worth quitting. Because if they went home, what were they going to do? Sweep floors and things like that. So most of these players, the good ones, played 12 months of the year. They'd play in America, and then when it got to be winter, they'd go down to Mexico and Cuba and play again. So these leagues that the black players played in had some benefit, but the fact of the matter is there's no comparison between them and the white major leagues. So we really don't have their names on the tip of our tongue. Those of us who grew up with baseball, we always have players in our mind, maybe not Hall of Famers, But if you're a Yankee fan, you all know who Craig Nettles is. Right? He's a great third baseman for them. Let me tell you, there are a whole bunch of great third basemen that never got a chance for you to know their name. So they disappear in anonymity. They never had a chance to compete. Well, baseball was a big factor in getting that changed, and I want to today just talk about 3 players kind of quickly. Not players. The first guy's not a player at all. There's an owner named Bill Veeck. We should probably do a whole show on Bill Veeck because he is a crazy guy. He was so innovative when he owned teams. He did the most wild things. He started off buying a minor league team in Milwaukee, the Milwaukee Brewers. Worst team in the league, lowest attendance. And this guy came in there and he literally lived at the ballpark. He shook the hands of people when they came in, said goodbye to them when they left. He brought in so many promotions that shortly this team became the highest attendance in the minor leagues, and they won the league 2 years in a row. One of the most, he did a lot of creative things, but I'll tell you one to show you how innovative he was. In Milwaukee, there was a factory, a 24-hour factory, and a lot of guys getting out of work after working all night long. So what he did is he scheduled the ball games at 10 in the morning so these guys could get off work, come to the ballpark, and when they got there, there was a 7-piece swing band playing for them. Instead of hot dogs and beer, the ushers had dressed in pajamas and nightcaps handed out donuts, coffee, and cornflakes. So they had something to eat, and then they'd go to the ball game, and after the ball game, they'd go home and go to bed. And the attendance went way up because these guys couldn't come to a ball game except on the weekends. Now they could come during the week. That's how innovative Bill Veeck was. Well, at one time, there were 2 teams in Philadelphia, Philadelphia Athletics, Philadelphia Phillies, and the Phillies were horrible. They were in last place every year. The owner wanted to sell them. So Bill Veeck met with the owner of the Phillies. He had sold the Brewers, and he wanted to buy the Phillies, and they worked out a deal. Then he went to the commissioner of baseball, Judge Landis, and told him his plans. He said, I'm going to buy the Phillies, and I'm going to fill it with black players from the black leagues. They're going to have no white players. And Landis, because there wasn't a law against that, was mediocre. But then weeks later, Veeck found out that the Phillies got sold to somebody else for less money than he had offered. Somebody went behind and said, we can't have that happen. Well, after that, Bill Veeck ended up buying the Cleveland Indians. He really knew a lot about these black baseball players. So in 1947, Jackie Robinson took the field, first black player in 65 years. Only a couple months later, Bill Veeck signed a player by the name of Larry Doby. Incredibly gifted athlete. I mean, he could run, he could throw, he could hit. He was playing for the Newark Eagles, and he came on the Cleveland Indians toward the end of 47, making 2 players in the major leagues who were black. He didn't play very much. He batted 150, and the papers were filled with all this racism saying, this is proof black players can't play with white players. He's no good. This is an experience destined to fail. 1948 changed everything. In 1948, the Dodgers brought on a second black player, Roy Campanella. And the Indians, because Veeck had been building up this Indian teams, they had great pitchers. They started off in first place and stayed in first place. And they had great pitchers, but as the season wore on, he was concerned that they didn't have enough depth in pitching. So he went out and he signed 42-year-old Satchel Paige to come on the Indians lineup, making 4 players down in the major leagues who were black. What Satchel Paige did was incredible. After a couple of relief stints, he pitched his first starting game in Comiskey Park in Chicago, 50,000 fans, and throws a 5-hit shutout. Wow, that's amazing. 6 days later, he comes home. Cleveland's Municipal Stadium on a Friday night. I'll give you the date, I don't have the date. I had it on a piece of paper. Friday night in Cleveland, 78,000 people come to this Friday night game to see Satchel Paige pitch. And what does he do? He pitches a shutout again. And the Indians and the fans in Cleveland just endorsed the Indians. They hung on. They won the pennant. Now, Satchel kind of drifted. He became less effective as the season went on. But he finished the season at 42 years old with a record of 6-1 with an ERA of 2.48 at 42 years old. So now Cleveland's going to the World Series because the thinking was, oh, you might have a good black player, but they'll never win. It's really important that a black player be on a winning team. So Cleveland played the Boston Braves, which had great pitchers also. 2-1 lead, game 4. Cleveland has this guy named Steve Gromick pitching. And they win the game 2-1 to take a 3-1 lead in the series. The reason they win the game is the winning home run was hit by Larry Doby. At the end of the game, this is a picture. We're going to show it to you guys when I'm done. This picture changed people's attitude in America because at the end of the game, there's an amazing picture of Steve Gromick and Larry Doby hugging with huge smiles on their faces. They were one game from winning the World Series, which they won. And the Indians won the World Series, haven't won since, but they won it. 2 black players making the key. And all of a sudden, all the arguments about why black players wouldn't fit in were just being shattered. But this picture that you're going to see was in every newspaper in America. And it was fantastic. Steve Gromick and Larry Doby. So we want to remember these guys because changing the attitudes of the people was a long, hard process. You know, when a black guy came in the league, his own teammates, the people he played against, the fans, they had awful time with the abuse they had to take. It took a while, but this picture is amazing, and that's my story for today.
Did Larry Doby end up in the Hall of Fame?
Yes. There are 37 players from the black leagues that were put in the Hall of Fame. A lot of them never played in the majors. Some did. But Larry Doby certainly is one of them. Satchel Paige, they're in the Hall of Fame, as is Campanella and Jackie Robinson and a whole bunch of other guys.
Satchel Paige doing what he's doing at 42. And when did he retire? It was right?
They brought him out of retirement when he was in his late 50s. Kansas City did it to get the crowd to come in. And he went out and pitched 3 shutout innings when he was like 58 years old.
Oh, jeez. Was it, 1965?
I don't have it in front of me. But
and I think this is one of the tragic things, but also one of the great things about baseball. We've talked about before, when we talked about Moses Fleet Walker and his career, how baseball is this microcosm of America and what America was going through at the time. And in a lot of ways, baseball kind of being on the leading edge and pushing things forward as far as integration and ending segregation. I think what that picture speaks to is this idea that, at the end of the day, there's one objective for in this case, a baseball team, but for us as Americans and for us as humanity. And I think that, Martin Luther King Jr. talked about that when saying, like, there's that unfulfilled promise of America, right? Where, all men are created equal. They're judged by the character, not by the color of their skin. And the idea that these guys were shut out of baseball.
So what happens is you got to get to a state where that doesn't matter. The question is, can you play? If you can play, you can make the team. If you can make the team, do you make first string or whatever? Can you play? And once we create an environment where that's the only measurement, then racism and hatred comes from a basis of ignorance. Just a basis of ignorance. And so once the fans saw their teams were winning and their best players were Willie Mays and Frank Robinson and Bob Gibson, it wasn't an issue anymore. It's just, can you play? Can we win with you?
That's interesting because I'll bet the casual fan, and I'm going to say the casual fan, like the fan that's not studying the history of the game, that type of thing, probably doesn't know the name Larry Doby.
Mm-mm.
You know Jackie Robinson, right? You know Satchel Paige, because those are names that are talked about. But the fact that Larry Doby hit that home run and was such an instrumental part of that game, maybe inside of Cleveland, right? That's mentioned and that's talked about.
Yeah, he kind of goes under the radar because he was the second, but he was the first in the American League. I mean, for a long time, he was the only black guy in the whole American League, and they didn't play each other back then. So he had a very, very rough time with that whole thing. But so yeah, it's not a humorous story for sure. But we change. Now baseball's not the most popular sport. However, on the same topic, do you know that almost 1 out of every 4 major league players today comes from a small country in Latin America called the Dominican Republic? That little country, 1 out of 4 major leaguers from that country. So again, it's, can you play? And it's a tribute.
Well, think about how many baseball players have come from Cuba, right?
Well, not as many because they couldn't get out.
Right. But it's a way out, right, for some of those players too.
Guys who came over literally came out in a boat.
Right.
So now it's a little easier, but for a while, getting players from Cuba was an adventure. But
yeah. I've been to Cooperstown. I've been to the Hall of Fame, but I have not been to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
That's in Kansas. That's in Kansas City. Yeah,
Kansas City. But to anybody listening, if you haven't been to nlbm.com, go there. It's worth a visit. And if you're in the Kansas City area, I know probably something. Next time I'm in town, I'll probably go check it out. I love museums, and I just probably haven't gotten a chance to be in Kansas City for that. But something certainly to, encourage and support, kind of rediscovering that history of that part of baseball, right?
Look, good things in life come at a sacrifice and a price. And these guys had to pay the price so that we could kick the cataracts out of our eyes.
Yeah, it's interesting when you go back to that history, and we've had a couple episodes on this where we look at our history, and it's these owners as well. Like you were talking about Veeck, right? There's a lot of stories about him, and he was not, because baseball has this tradition, this certain slow flow to it. It's almost like a slow water ride at a music park. It has a certain pace. And if an owner comes in and they're causing too much of a ruckus, they're also viewed in a poor light. They're also
hated.
They're also, the writers don't like them. They don't like how they're tilting the apple cart. The other owners certainly don't like them. There's a book about him. I think it's called Veeck, as in wreck, how he literally wrecked his way forward, if you will. So there's a lot of interesting history, and you needed those people who broke the wall down, per se, and were able to see that this is what the people want. Will be exciting for the people. This will be exciting for folks to enjoy, and to see that forward, and to see beyond the biases and the short-term vision, that long-term vision, if you will.
Veeck understood that this was entertainment, and we had to get the people to come to it. I'll just tell you a couple of things he did. He put a left field wall on wheels. And when his team was up, he would move it in closer. And then when the other team came up, he would move it out until they told him he couldn't do that anymore. But he's also the guy, after he lost the Cleveland Indians because of a divorce, and he didn't have the money to keep them. He bought the St. Louis Browns. And he's the guy who signed Eddie Goodell, the midget.
Right.
He came into a baseball game and walked on 4 pitches. Then they pinch right for him. And then they said, as soon as the game was over, they said, you have a height requirement now in baseball. You can't do that. But he was always thinking of ways to figure this thing out.
He's the guy that in your life, and we all have them, either at your job or career, that will, if you didn't write a policy that specifically said you can't do something, he's going to do it, which will make a middle manager lose their mind and have to write a policy saying you can no longer do that. The outfield wall is fantastic. That is that is as fans probably moved it, and I'm sure it wasn't arbitrary.
Right.
I'm sure it was like, we'll move it in to a certain distance. And if you're the outfielder for the other team and you're watching the actual outfield move towards you, you can complain to your manager and everybody else. Home field advantage. That's home field advantage.
What are the chances that Banana Ball names a team after Veeck?
They should. Bill Veeck, when he was in Milwaukee, put a keg on the field, and he would draw a name from the stands. And that person could come down and get a draft beer right in front of everybody. They'd pour him a draft beer. He'd go back in the stands.
And the fact that he was out there shaking hands too. Anybody who does anything, our grandfather Lemieux, Messina, New York. I still remember when we were going through his storage, and he had a beautiful briefcase. And this is, again, a testament to the era. The briefcase for when he closed the sale as an insurance salesman had 2 glasses and a place for a bottle and all the paperwork in it. So the briefcase was, here, let's toast to this wonderful deal we just made. So we're doing this together, shaking hands, if you will, going house to house. And he would share a drink with that individual, and then he would sign the paperwork and close the deal. And he brought all that with him to the sale. It wasn't, oh, do you have a drink or do you have a coffee? No, I brought it all. I'm here. I'm going to toast you. Here, I brought
Right.
the finest bottle, or I brought this. And to make that person not only feel like they're a part of something, but to feel like they're doing something good.
I'm glad you read that thing about Bill Veeck. People should probably read more about him. He certainly was a character. When he signed Larry Doby and he brought him into the locker room, he introduced him to the team. 3 players would not shake hands with Larry Doby. As soon as the meeting was over, Bill Veeck went and talked to every one of them. He got in their face. Larry Doby felt secure because he saw that being done. That didn't happen again. He made it clear, this guy's here, and he's going to be a major part of the team. And you don't like it, well, we can take care of that.
And that's hard for people. If you're going into an area, and again, we can't even relate, but can you imagine being the first black player on a team, knowing full well the hatred? Not just like, we don't like you. There was hatred, the amount of names, violence, things that they wanted to do to these human beings just because of the color of their skin. So when you have someone on your team who is, again, not going to put up with it, the fact that your owner would go into their face, tell them that is not going to stand. I prefer to have him on the team as opposed to the 3 of you. That's a huge deal for that player, because the amount of scrutiny he received outside of the game, let alone inside the game, because it wasn't like, oh, they got to play baseball and suddenly America was this united. There were still so many roads and bridges that needed to be paved for these individuals when they went into different towns, whether it's protection, whether it's they couldn't eat at certain restaurants, they couldn't enjoy the same livelihoods as the other baseball players. They were a second citizen on that one team. And the stress of that on a human being, and again, they were focused on delivering when it came to baseball to prove not only for themselves, but for so many behind them, that they were going to be stalwarts of that. It was, again, you can't say enough of that. And I mean, you can't tell enough stories to that regard, because those people, and I just can't even imagine the emotional stress. I mean, you had a 162 game season, 81 games on the road. Some of those cities, I can't even imagine how terrible they were. And possibly getting thrown something at you, and you weren't necessarily protected. It wasn't the visiting stadiums were not there to help you, and you had your team, and you're hoping that your team would stand up for you. But again, that was a very trying time for the United States. It was a very trying time for, I would say, the culture as a whole. And we are indebted to these folks for what they did.
But think of But think about the difference between that era and those individuals. And I'm not saying everybody from that era thought like this, but can you imagine knowing full well you will never, ever, ever be appreciated in your lifetime for what it is that you go through, that everything you're going through is to make it better for the next generation, that you're not trying to you're not trying to get the win now. You're not looking for the glory now. You're literally on the bow of the ship breaking through the ice at the Arctic, just to make it easier for everybody else after you. There's a courage in that, and there's just a plain courageousness in that I can't even imagine people going through today.
Yeah.
Because even the sense of like, I'm going to do this thing, we use this phrase nowadays of like, well, history's going to judge, or history's going to look on this person, and the truth is that if we're reflecting on what history is going to say about us, we right there don't have the right attitude about what it is that we're doing. It's not about what history says about us when we're in those moments and we're asked to stand up and do something courageous. It's about, is this the right thing, and is it going to make it easier for the people after me? The fact that history writes about you later on is, it's frosting on the cake. That shouldn't be the main reason you're doing it, So.
And they had zero wiggle room. They couldn't act inappropriately. They couldn't have any off the field. Today's what we call them distractions. You had to be on the straight and narrow the whole time. And even if somebody,
you couldn't fight back.
Nope.
You had to take that abuse and just walk away.
And so to have that, it's almost like having a peaceful aura of yourself, because there's something so much bigger. But it also speaks to the fact that what you were saying was so well said about courage and courage under fire. When you have a bigger hill, a bigger purpose to fly to, and to be able to keep your head about you and your wits about you, that's another thing that's fantastic. I think it's also another tragedy of all of this is if you look at our baseball writers or what have you, you can't imagine that the baseball writers as a majority were for this. The majority of the writers were against this. The majority of the owners were against this. I mean, if there was a vote for a majority, it was certainly not for that. So you're going against everybody.
So, true proof of that is one of the major writers in Cleveland after 1947 wrote an article in the paper about Larry Doby's 150 average proves that blacks don't belong in the major leagues. And people read that and they believed it and all that stuff. And like you said, he was a writer. Nobody challenged him. He wrote it and they said, it must be true.
Right.
And that's one of the...
Going against that cultural narrative, or even that narrative that even the media is putting out there, that's a lot. It takes a lot. I honestly, I don't know if I would do that. I don't think I'm that brave.
Very few people do. No, very few.
I was told a good line by someone who was served in special forces, and you said there's a lot of people who speak highly of what their nobility and courage will be, and he said you only find this out when bullets are blazing, and you only find out what a person's made of. And he always said the quiet, small-spoken person usually rose to the occasion in a big way. And the ones that were the loudest when nothing was flying were usually the meekest in those challenges. And it was very interesting to listen to his stories. I obviously have never served. I don't have any of those experiences, but to know that we have people who are quiet, confident, courageous. And that is a reminder of those people, I think, that went into baseball. I mean, you could argue that they were going into battle some sort. And they certainly couldn't do it boastfully, and they couldn't do it loudly. They had to be quiet, they had to be reserved, and they had to be like a sniper's bullet, correct and right on all the time.
Well, the crazy thing to me is that this is a game. It's an entertainment. And yet, because baseball was so popular at that time, it had an effect of changing the nation. I had an opportunity to hear Roy Campanella talk, and he said, when Jackie and I came in the league, the NBA, the NFL were all white. He said, this was just unheard of. He said, we were out there before Martin Luther King. It was just us. And he said, I'm just proud that the nation has been affected by just a silly thing like a baseball game. But it did. It had an effect. And I think the picture that we show at the end of this, people will really get a picture of how shocking and wonderful that was to see these two embracing.
Dad, when you were growing up, and so you're born the year that Jackie Robinson started playing baseball.
The year after. I was 48 Indians. That's when I was born.
Yeah, so there wasn't like a conscious oh, this is a big change in baseball, infant at the time. Did it seem odd to you when you were watching other sports that weren't integrated? Like, why weren't they integrated? Like baseball, did you recognize that? What was that like?
I grew up in a town that had one black family in the whole town. So lily white, I lived in a white world. So I guess it didn't even strike me because I followed baseball as my favorite sport, and my favorite player was black. My friends followed baseball. On each of their teams, their favorite player was black. We had Hank Aaron, Roberto Clemente, and Willie Mays were the three teams we cheered for. So it was just really not an issue. And I don't know, we didn't think in social justice language. We just thought about win the game, get the hit, move the man over, throw the right pitch. And if you could do that, terrific. And I don't know, it's a different world. We didn't have sports on television when I grew up like we do now. We got one football game a week, a college game on Saturday, and a pro game on Sunday. That was it. No ESPN, no highlights. Our experience with baseball was pretty much on the radio. We listened to baseball games, and that's pretty much how I grew up.
Yeah, well, this is, again, as we're walking through history and baseball in America, I think the biggest things that speak to me or resonate with me is the fact that it wasn't a preconceived notion of a movement. It needed to be done, and those that wanted to do it stepped up to do it. It wasn't, you have to do this needs to be done. It was people who saw this was the way it needed to be, and it needed to be remedied. And they really, it took a lot of individual ambition to get there. It wasn't a group mentality. It wasn't the populace have spoken, and now we need to have African-American players playing in baseball. It wasn't that. It was, here are the individuals that really were advocating for this and running forward with it. And it was a great responsibility, not only for, I think more so on the player than anybody else. Jackie Robinson, for instance, the amount of pressure and anxiety, if you will, and everyone goes through their struggles in life. And you look back at that, and it was like they carried a massive weight, and they carried it honorably, and they carried it with nobility and strength that needs to be admired. And happily, baseball does admire that strength. So this was a great story.
What I got from it was always have the drink and the glasses in the briefcase, because you never know when the deal's going to close. You never know when it's going to be your moment and your time to shine. Be ready.
Yep.
Be prepared.
And God rest your soul, Grandpa Lemieux. You were fantastic. Had some wonderful stories as well. Could sit and listen to you for a while. So, and on that note, signing off for here, I'm your host, Brendan. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Todd. Wonderful episode.
We'll talk to you.
Click like. Click subscribe. We got a wealth of information pouring out. And the other thing is, why aren't you wearing a SwingBadder hat? SwingBadder shirt. Be the first one on the block, because it's coming. It's coming.